All right. Hope everyone's having a great afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I am Tippy Birch here representing the Columbus contingent of the Federalist Society. But I'm glad to be here and excited to introduce Judge Lisa Branch, who is known to, I think, many of you already, but who is going to be interviewing Brett Talley today in their Fireside chat. But Judge Branch is an Atlanta native. After earning her BA from Davidson College, she earned her JD from Emory University School of Law. After she graduated from law school, she served as a law clerk to Judge Owen Forrester of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. She worked in private practice at the same firm, all the way from summer associate to partner. That was the Atlanta firm of Smith, Gambrell, and Russell. She did take a break during her time there to head to D.C. from 2004 to 2008, where she served as a senior official in the administration of President George W. Bush in Washington, D.C., in various roles up there. And then after some time back in private practice in Atlanta, she was appointed to the Georgia Court of Appeals in 2012. She served there until 2018 when she was appointed to serve as circuit judge on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. I also want to make sure we all know that she is a member of the advisory board of the Atlanta chapter of the Federalist Lawyers chapter of the Federalist Society. And we thank her for being here to interview Brett Talley, who is a native of Birmingham, Alabama. I did tell him earlier that I agreed to introduce him before I realized he had graduated from the University of Alabama. It's a little painful for me, but it is what it is. After that, he went on to Harvard Law School, where he earned his JD. After law school, he served as a law clerk to Judge Scott Kugler of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Alabama, and to Judge Joel Dabena of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. He worked in private practice at Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher. He served as Deputy Solicitor General for the state of Alabama. He joined the U.S. Department of Justice, where he served as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he currently serves as the Appellate Chief of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Alabama. He is also, and very interestingly, and what I hope to hear a lot more about, one half of the highly popular Top 100 true crime podcast, The Prosecutors. So please welcome them both.
Thank you, Tippy, and thank you to everybody who is attending our second annual Georgia Lawyers Conference for the Federalist Society. I also thank Dean Reuter and his wife, Luann, who have come in from D.C. We have a lot of the folks who work up at FedSoc National who are present, and I think that's always very important to have them here. As a longstanding member of the Federalist Society, I love attending the Federalist Society National Convention. As a judge, I love the opportunity that I have to go to the various student chapters around the country, but there's something special about attending the conference for my home state. Like Judge Dillard, I too love Georgia. And the Georgia conference is important because it's a time for us to showcase many esteemed Georgia speakers, our lawyers, our judges, although I do have to, similarly to Tippy, apologize. We had that Texas guy in that last panel, and we've got this Alabama guy here. But with that, I want to jump into my fireside chat with Brett Talley, who so graciously agreed to come over from Alabama to do this. And Brett, you have an impressive resume. I'm not going to repeat it that Tippy walked through, but right now you are serving as the AUSA for the Middle District of Alabama. You are the appellate chief, in fact, for the criminal cases. You are married, you have 3 kids, and somehow in your spare time, you co-host 2 podcasts with Alice LaCour, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. One is The Prosecutors, and one is Legal Briefs. Can you tell us about your podcasts in case some people aren't familiar with them?
Absolutely, and I just want to say thank you guys for having me. I'm currently on congressionally mandated vacation, so it's really great to have something to come do. And the judges will love this. We're going through the process of who's going to be essential and who's going to be non-essential. And I was like, I'm the appellate chief. And they're like, sorry, appellate law, not essential. And I was like, well, I'm also the ethics advisor and the professional responsibility person. I'm here, so you can guess what they said about ethics and professional responsibility. No, it's great to be here. Yeah, we have a super full, busy life. It's wonderful. You know, my wife is the only reason we can even do the podcast. I think Alice would say the same thing about her husband. We record at 8 o'clock at night. You know, we're researching at night and on the weekends because we do both have full-time jobs. We're the host of the Prosecutors and the Prosecutors Legal Briefs. One of them is a true crime podcast. One of them is a little bit more sort of law nerdy. So, you know, probably y'all would like that one better. I'm just going to go on a limb and say. But let me just say this. You're probably like, why are we talking about true crime? You know, we were just talking about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the right of revolution and all that stuff. And here we are talking about a true crime podcast. Think about for a second what true crime really is. It's about the Constitution. It's about due process. It's about investigations. It's about justice. It's about lawyers and judges and prosecutors working together to make our entire system run. If you go back and you look at the preamble of the Constitution, you know, justice is pretty high up on the things that the Constitution ensures occur. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to do this, because we looked out at the sort of true crime world. And what do you see? You see a lot of people who they're really entertaining, they're really engaging, but they don't really know much about any of that. And a lot of times the message they're sending to their listeners is, man, what a broken system. How much injustice. All these innocent people in prison, these evil prosecutors, these terrible cops. Man, we should oppose the police. We should defund law enforcement. That's what they're saying, right? There weren't a whole lot of people talking about the other side of it, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted to do it.
Well, so why podcasting? Again, you seem to lead a pretty full life with your job and your home life. What made you decide, hey, I think we should start a podcast?
So, you know, this was never going to work for television. So I was thinking, podcast, I like to talk. It's probably pretty obvious. In reality, I love true crime. I love it. I listen to it all the time, and frankly, was sort of seeing that gap there. And Alice and I would be working. She shared an office with me, and not an office, a wall. So her office was right next door. And I would wander in and be like, hey, you ever heard of this Maura Murray case? Like, I'm really interested in this case. Or the Lake Oconee murders, you ever heard of that? And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so then I would explain it to her, and we'd talk about it. And at some point, I was like, you know what? We should do a podcast together. Completely just sort of like random thing. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this day and age, you're only interesting if you don't have a podcast, because everybody has one, so why not us? And that, it was honestly, the way Alice would put it, she just had a baby. She was in like postpartum fog when I approached her with it. She didn't think it through, and now all of a sudden, 5 years later, we're still doing it.
So you've explained why you got into the true crime field. This is a crowded field on podcasts, the true crime. How do you distinguish yourselves in that crowded field?
Well, obviously, we called it the Prosecutors for a reason, because we knew that the most people who talk in podcasts, who talk on television, who are on court TV, or who are doing law and crime, if they have a legal background, most of them are defense attorneys. Defense attorneys, and there may be some defense attorneys in the room, we love you. We talk about how much we love defense attorneys just because we call it the Prosecutors. But defense attorneys are used to talking to the press, right? I mean, that's one of the things they do, and oftentimes they're very good at it. Prosecutors are often limited in their ability to talk to the press. Limited not only by their own concerns about doing it, but by the rules of ethics, not wanting to influence juries. There's all sorts of reasons prosecutors don't talk. And so they are not given the opportunity to put forward their perspective. As I said, very few people in the podcasting realm are talking about the things we were talking about from the perspective we were bringing. So we thought, if we can do this, if people will listen to us, we can make this go. We didn't put any money into it. I'm an evangelist for podcasting. So podcasting is very easy to do. It has a very low barrier of entry. We bought some equipment. We started talking. We started publishing episodes. We didn't do ads. We didn't do any of that. The podcast grew because people listened to it, and they were like, I've never heard anything like this before. And then they would share it with their friends, and they would share it with their friends. And then, you know, now we have 2 podcasts, 500 episodes between them, 50 million downloads. And it was all by word of mouth, just from people who'd never heard that perspective before, and suddenly were like, wow, this is different.
How do you measure what is the measure of a successful podcast?
Well, I think there's several. It depends on what you're doing. For us, obviously, we wanted people to listen. I mean, that was important to us. And I think that's important to most people. But I'll say this, the great thing about podcast, it really depends on what your goal is. You know, if you have a podcast on Georgia legislation and only 100 people listen to it, is that a failure? Well, it depends. Are those 100 people Georgia legislators? If they are, all of a sudden you've got influence, right? When we started out, initially, it was crazy the number of people who would email us and say, hey, I'm a judge, I'm a prosecutor, I'm a lawyer. You know, I'm listening to this for the first time. I'm getting a perspective I've never gotten before. And that was before, you know, the numbers started rolling in. So we're already starting to feel like we're having an influence. The number of people who would say, hey, I'd never really thought about this before. Our audience, I'm going to be conservative in my estimate because I tend to be conservative. 70% of our audience, probably higher, are women between 25 and 50 who have a college degree and lean left. That's our audience, 70% of it, probably higher than that, probably more like 75 or 80. Those are people that, frankly, Alice and I they would never sit in a room and talk to us. You know, they would never think, I want to get their perspective on this. But because of the way we present the podcast, and one of the things we do, I mean, we basically took inspiration from the Federalist Society. One of the things I've always loved about the Federalist Society is, you know, when you engage people in ideas, and when you think your ideas are better, you don't have to be abrasive. You don't have to be overtly political. You can just talk to people about the things you believe and why you believe them. Our podcast, and we promise people this from the beginning, will never be political. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about elections. And the number of people who will say things, we get canceled at least once every 6 months. There'll be, you know, the Daily Beast wrote an article about how we were this subversive podcast trying to influence all of these people through our, you know, talking about true crime, right? Daily Beast's never been right about much, but they might have been right about that, I don't know. But we often have people who write to us and say, hey, you know, I have never voted for a Republican in my life, but, you know how it is. Everything before the but doesn't matter, right? Then they talk about hearing things they'd never heard before. I'll give you an example. The chief of staff for the Baltimore DA, who I'm going to go out on a limb, you can probably guess, not a conservative, not a Republican, right? Wrote us an email and talked about how much she enjoyed our Legal Briefs 2 episodes on birthright citizenship. And she learned so much about birthright citizenship and the history of birthright citizenship. We can do, because we have credibility with people and because we don't approach things from a political point of view, we can do legal discussions about incredibly controversial topics like that. And not only do people listen to it, but they write us and tell us how much they like it, even though her views on what exactly that means and what the limitations can be on that are probably very different. And that's one of the things when you talk about success, I love that we can have that conversation. It was like they were talking about on this last panel, being able to talk to people who are different from you. This is such, and I never imagined this. I mean, I thought we'd get up there and talk about, you know, mysteries, like this person disappeared, isn't that creepy, right? But all of a sudden, it's turning into this thing where we're having this conversation with all these people. We did a couple episodes on the Charlie Kirk murder, you know? And yeah, there were a handful of people who wrote in and said, I'll never listen to you again. But that was not the overwhelming response. The overwhelming response from our 70%, 25 to 50 women with degrees who lean left was, thank you so much for saying that. I feel like things have gotten so heated, I don't want it to be like this anymore. So that's my measure of success more than the number of downloads.
But there's also a financial component too. I know, having listened to some of your episodes, you do have sponsors.
Kitty Litter was our first sponsor.
That's right.
Pretty Litter, to be specific.
And so there are people who make their living at being a podcaster. Any sense that you're going to quit your day job and do this full time?
So my wife tells me I can't quit my day job because she's afraid I'll get another hobby and it'll be worse than this one. So she's like, you got to keep going to work during the day so that you'll stay busy. I mean, look, I love doing it, but I also really like practicing law. I mean, I like coming and arguing before the court. The last time I was here, came for an oral argument in 11th Circuit, and I wake up before the argument, and I have forgotten a tie. And I got to tell you, at that point, the argument was the last thing in my mind. It was like, I'm going to walk into this courtroom, and these judges are going to be like, why do you not have time? Savior over here, and law clerks, you got a lot to live up to because the law clerk class let me borrow a tie. So anyways, but I like doing that as well.
He was not appearing before me at the time.
It's true.
So you've talked about how many episodes you've done?
So the Prosecutors has about 330, and Legal Briefs has about 170, so 500-ish total.
How many crimes have you covered?
You know, that's hard. So we do some cases in one case, right? So we did the John Benet Ramsey case, which some of you may think of as a Colorado case, but actually has really strong ties to Georgia. John Benet Ramsey is buried just down the street in Marietta, Georgia. And if you know anything about that case, the GBI, who's one of the best investigative agencies in the country, they actually built a fake tombstone next to John Benet Ramsey's tombstone, put a listening device in it so that on the anniversary of her death, they could hear everything people said, because they really thought somebody was going to come to her grave and express remorse for what had happened to her. They actually just caught a bunch of relatives crying and sobbing and kind of felt bad about it afterwards. But, you know, that case, which I can talk about all day, we did, I think, 10 episodes on. And we did 24 episodes on the West Memphis 3, which is a case out of Arkansas. We did, I think, 3 on the Lake Oconee murders, which I don't know if y'all know. Who knows that case? One of the wildest cases you could ever imagine. You have 2 elderly people, retired people, been retired for decades, not an enemy in the world. Everybody loves them, right? Live on the lake, Lake Oconee, Reynolds Plantation, one of the safest places you could be. And they don't return phone calls for a little while. A neighbor goes over, finds the husband dead in the garage, decapitated. They have never found his head. Blood everywhere. Can't find the wife. They later find her in Lake Oconee. She's been basically tied to a cinder block and thrown in the lake. Just one of the most horrific crimes you can imagine. And the police have no idea who did it. They don't have a motive. They don't have anything. So some of the cases we talk about are like that, where they're pure mysteries. And that one's just wild. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. Others are things like the John Benet Ramsey case. How many people here think, sorry if I'm like stepping all over you, no. How many people here think that the family of John Benet Ramsey had something to do with the murder? Come on, be brave. Come on. Okay, got a whole bunch of people over here. How many people have never heard of the John Benet case? There we go. That's how you know you got a generational divide right there. If you guys had been alive and sentient in the 90s, you absolutely would have heard of it. There just could not have got away from it. I mean, well, anyways, for those of you who don't know, John Benet Ramsey was a 6-year-old girl, beautiful little girl, who was brutally murdered, found in her home on Christmas. She was murdered on Christmas Day. She was found the next day. Her father actually found her in a basement closet. Incredibly controversial case. A lot of people think the family did it, but we did 10 episodes on it. One of the most interesting things about the case, and if you're interested in this kind of stuff, go look this up. The craziest ransom note. There's a ransom note in this case. It's 3 pages long. 3-page long ransom note. The FBI was like, we've never seen anything like this. And you see a ransom note, it's like 3 lines, right? This one went on for 3 pages. And a lot of people, it was written on paper taken from the kitchen. Now, when the police showed up, they helpfully brought some victim witness people with them who very kindly, I'm sure, thinking they were doing the right thing, cleaned the whole kitchen, scrubbed everything down so that by the time the police realized, oh, shoot, we have a murder here, there's nothing they can get out of the kitchen, right? No forensics. The note is written from a piece of paper, 3 pieces of paper from the kitchen with a pen from the kitchen. So a lot of people are like, this must have been someone inside. No one would walk into a house, murder a little girl, hide her body, and then write a 3-page long note, right? And that makes lots of sense. But this is why you can't just go based on your first thought. If you look at that note and you read it, I want you to go home and do it. Here's what you'll notice. There are lines almost verbatim from Die Hard, from the movie Ransom, from the movie Speed, from the movie Awful People, Terrible People, Horrible People. I don't know, it's got Danny DeVito in it.
Ruthless people.
Ruthless people. Right, ruthless people. In Speed, some of you may remember there's a scene where the guy says, don't you dare grow a brain, right? Some of y'all have never seen Speed, right? You never heard of Speed. Yeah. Well, that line is in the note. The stuff from Ruthless People is almost quoted verbatim. This is the early 90s. There was no Google. You could not have looked those up. That means whoever did that spent a ton of time watching those movies to the point that they had memorized lines and included them in their ransom note for when they kidnapped a little girl in a house. I'm going to go out on a limb and tell you that wasn't a former beauty queen from West Virginia, the mom. It wasn't a tech geek dad, and it wasn't a 9-year-old boy. Those are the three suspects for the family. And something like that tells you this was an intruder. And what most of you don't know, and this is the kind of thing we like to clarify, the family's actually been exonerated by the police based on DNA results from the mid-2000s. Most people have no idea that happened. And that's one of the things we try and do is inform people, because John Ramsey now will speak to anyone who will listen about his daughter's murder. And whenever he does, everyone in the room's crying. And those people walk to that room and they say, hey, no way that guy did it. He didn't have anything to do with it, right? And so that's why I think this is important. It's entertainment, but it's also educational, and I think you can really dispel a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation with it.
I think one of the things that just as I'm listening to him talk, and I've listened to the JonBenet Ramsey podcast, is just his amount of recall of the details as he's sitting here on this stage about the Lake Oconee murders, about the JonBenet Ramsey case. How long does it take you to prepare for an episode? It's clear that you're reading books, you're watching interviews, you're looking into evidence. How much time does it take, and does anybody help you prepare?
So my wife complains about this because I can never remember anyone's name that we meet. I'm like, what's that guy's name that we've known for 10 years? And she's like, you can tell me the name of the guy who disappeared, David Lewis, while he made a sandwich. This happened back when the Cowboys were good, so that's how long ago that was, before any of y'all were born. He's getting ready to watch the Cowboys playing the Super Bowl, right? He sets his VCR to record. A VCR is this thing that you used back in the day to record stuff. But you really got to do this when you're doing the podcast. I mean, seriously. So anyways, and we went through a whole thing about what a VCR is. He sets his VCR to record the Super Bowl because he's a big Cowboys fan. He goes, he makes a sandwich, and then disappears. His wife had been out shopping. She comes home, sandwich is sitting on a plate in the kitchen, VCR is recording the Cowboys. Her husband's nowhere to be found. 24 hours later, in Washington State, so he was in Texas. 24 hours later, a guy's driving down the road in the middle of nowhere outside of Tacoma, Washington State, hits a guy, random person walking down the street, calls the police. They come. The guy's in full camo fatigues, no ID, nothing. Becomes a John Doe. Nobody knows who that guy is. Nobody knows what happened to David Lewis. 20 years later, some cop doing cold cases is like, we should do a DNA test on this guy, see if we can figure out who it is. It's David Lewis, the guy in Washington. Somehow went from making a sandwich right before the Super Bowl to 24 hours later being a hit and run in Washington, and no one even knows how he got there, right? So those are the kind of cases we're doing, and those cases can take a lot of time to research. Like, that's one you can research pretty fast because, frankly, who knows, right? I mean, what is there to do? I've just told you the case. We got 2 episodes out of that somehow. I'm not sure how, right? And then some cases, it's just voluminous. So the West Memphis 3 case, which is about 3 teenagers who were accused of murdering 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas, as part of a satanic ritual in 1993. And one of whom was sentenced to death, and the other 2 were sentenced to life without parole. Researched that for years on that case, trying to get every single detail right. Spent 24 episodes on it, right? So we do the 1 episode thing that's fun and short and kind of wild, all the way to it can take forever. And it's one of those things where we have to put something out every week because people expect it. So, you have to plan and think about how you're going to do it and make sure that you're putting stuff out. And if any of you decide to do a podcast and you want to be successful, that is the most important thing. Just putting out content every single week at the exact same time so people know Tuesdays are the day I listen to Prosecutors. Fridays are the days I listen to legal briefs. And if you miss, they will let you know.
So in some of your episodes, I know you covered like the Brian Kohberger case. You talked about covering the Charlie Kirk assassination. So you're clearly taking current events. How do you choose the cold cases?
So when we do the cases, obviously we can't do anything we work on, or I work on. Alice is now in private practice. The cold cases, so people send us, I have the cases I'm really interested in. Alice has cases she's really interested in. People send us cases. When we started, I thought, man, if we do this long enough, we're going to run out of stuff to talk about. The list is like 800 entries long. I mean, it kind of tells you how much crime there is in America. And then sort of the breaking news stuff. You know, is it interesting to us? Is there an angle that we can pursue? We do a lot of that stuff on legal briefs. The Brian Kohberger case, for instance, we didn't really cover it until he decided to plead guilty, because there were so many people who were confused about why he would plead guilty. Why would the state agree to this? Is this a massive injustice? Isn't he just going to appeal now? All this stuff, right? And we were in a really good position to explain that to people, like what the rights were he was giving up, why this was actually a good thing, how the death penalty works, how it takes 30 years or more to actually execute someone, the continuous appeals that happen in death penalty cases, the fact the family has to go through all those. So we often are looking for, are there angles that we can take where we get to teach people about the justice system and about how things work. Now, sometimes it's just pure mysteries. The David Lewis thing, just mind-blowing, right? But otherwise, we are always trying to educate as we do it.
Well, and on the Brian Kohberger case, and I admit that I kind of went down the rabbit hole and was very disturbed with the details of that crime. And then I was looking for podcasts and found yours. But once he pleaded guilty, you know, that I think a lot of, I was looking forward to you covering the trial or something like that. So,
which we were going to do, you know.
Do you have any sense of, in your investigation of the details of the crime and why he did it?
No, and you'll never know.
Okay.
I mean, the thing that has become clear to me, both in the work that I did when I was in the Solicitor General's office working death penalty cases, in my current job doing the podcast, is you'll never know why people do the things they do, these horrific things. They'll never tell you, and if they do tell you, they're lying to you. And, you know, there's a case, a guy named Chris Watts out of North Carolina, which we've never covered. I don't think we will ever cover it. I started watching the documentary. My wife was sitting next to me. In like the first 2 minutes, it shows his daughters, and my wife is like, he's going to kill those girls, isn't he? And I was like, yeah, I don't want to watch this, and just kind of turned it off, because he's a family annihilator. He had a girlfriend who didn't want children. His wife was pregnant with his son, like 8 months pregnant with his son, so he brutally murdered her. He took his daughters out to the oil fields where he worked. He strangled one of them. His other daughter asked, are you going to do what you just did to my sister? He said yes, he did it, and then he dumped them in an oil tank. That's what he did to those children. And he has given multiple confessions explaining why he did what he did, what was going through his mind. They're all lies. And you can see the lies. If you compare what he says, even though he's confessing, he's guilty, he's been sentenced to life without parole, he cannot tell you why he did what he did. Now, I think his motive is pretty clear, but nevertheless, like what it was that enabled him to do something horrific like that. Same thing is true of serial killers. Same thing is true of just random people who do terrible things. Have you guys seen, I'm going to direct this to y'all. Have you seen Unknown Number? Okay, some people have. Unknown Number it's a documentary on Netflix, and it's about these kids who are in high school who are getting these horrific texts from an unknown number. For years this goes on. They can't find out who it is who's doing it. I'm not going to tell you who did it, just in case you want to watch it, right? Because they do eventually figure out who it was. But they actually interview that person. And that person is trying to explain why they did this thing. And it's like completely unbelievable, everything they say. They're lying to themselves, they're lying to you. And so at the end of the day, Kohberger is never going to tell us why he did it. And if he did tell us, I wouldn't trust it.
Well, it seems like, just as we're talking here today, that for the crimes that touch Georgia, and I do count JonBenet as touching Georgia, I think that a lot of Georgians who were growing up during that period felt very connected to it. And after JonBenet was murdered, the family came back to Georgia. Right. And I know Patsy Ramsey was going to church with a lot of people locally. So you have the JonBenet Ramsey case, the Lake Oconee murders, which I'm just stumped as to why that happened, how it happened, who did it. But we also have the Atlanta child murders that I was young when we appeared to have a serial killer on our hands, and young black boys were disappearing. So we seem to have a lot of unknown stories. How do you tackle the stories where we don't know who did it? Or I guess we do. Someone is in prison for the Atlanta child murders, for at least some of them. Do you tackle the stories with the unknown assailant differently than when you know who the person is who's pleaded guilty or been convicted?
So, yeah, I want to answer that, and then I want to talk a little bit about the Atlanta child murders as well. If it's an unknown case, one thing we're really careful about is not accusing anyone. It's not our job. We'll lay the evidence out for people. People can come to whatever conclusion they want to come to. But we don't think it's our job to accuse anyone. And the number of times that it turns out everyone was wrong. Just recently, there was a case that's like 40 years old that was finally solved, the Austin yogurt shop murders, where some young girls were brutally murdered at their place of business. People were tried and convicted of that. Their convictions were eventually overturned. People accused all sorts of people in Austin of doing it. Well, new DNA technology, it was actually a serial killer who wasn't even from Austin. So like all those people who got accused by various, people who knew a lot about the case and had really good reasons to accuse them, they all turned out to be innocent, right? So that's one thing we really try and avoid, because that stuff can just go crazy. We saw that in the Koberger case. The number of people, the ex-boyfriend, the Uber driver, the person who delivered Grubhub or whatever. Like these were all people who were accused, identified by people online, had their faces plastered all over the place. A professor from where they went to school actually ended up suing somebody, a YouTuber, who just kept saying that she did it and that she had all this proof that she did it. So we really want to avoid that kind of stuff. So when it is an unknown case, we try and present the facts. People can come to whatever conclusion they want to, but we're never going to accuse somebody in that circumstance. The Atlanta child murders are interesting. Back to you guys. Have y'all seen Mindhunter, the show? Okay, thank goodness. Mindhunter, great show. Well, if you've seen the second season, part of it is about the Atlanta child murders. This is something that happened in the late 70s, early 80s. These are cases that we like to talk about because they really can highlight some injustice in the system, because as we said, we are trying to present the truth about the system, and sometimes it's that there are injustice. Sometimes it's that the police fail. Sometimes it's that prosecutors overreach. That does happen. In that case, you had all these young black kids, mostly male, who were going missing, and the police really weren't doing a whole lot about it. The late 70s, early 80s in Atlanta, you can imagine sort of the racial tensions at the time. A lot of people in the community thought this was a white supremacist crime. They thought maybe even the police were involved in the crime. There was this huge divide. The FBI gets involved, and they eventually identify someone from the community, somebody who was presented himself, Wayne Williams, as he puts boy bands together. He's going to make you the next Michael Jackson, right? And so he would get these young kids to come audition for him, and then he would brutally murder them and dump them in various places around Atlanta. And eventually, sheer luck, he's dumping somebody over a bridge. The police see it happen. They stop him. Later on, they find the body down the river, so he gets arrested. Now, here's the problem. He's definitely guilty. Definitely did it. But guess what they did? They said, well, there you go. All those unsolved crimes, we just solved them. He killed all of them, right? They convicted him for a few cases where they actually had evidence, but they then pinned every single one of these murders that happened in Atlanta in 1979 and 1980 on this one guy. Now, did he kill some of them? Absolutely he did. Did he kill all of them? Probably not. And it's to the point where there actually is an effort now using some of this modern technology to try and see, did he commit all these murders? Is there someone out there who used him as a cover, killed these kids, and got away with it?
And to your point about the unsolved, and I think you made that very clear about the Lake Oconee murders, because this is something that happened in recent history, and it is unsolved. It is still an active investigation to the extent, it's been, 10 years?
Yeah, it's been over 10 years now.
10 years. I mean, it's still an unsolved crime. The same sheriff is in office, so theoretically, this could be at some point, we could have someone who is accused of this. But to your point about being very careful about that, in the Jean Bonnet podcast, you talk about that there was actually another connection to Georgia. There was a district court case that was before Judge Julie Carnes when she was on the district court.
There was. The only time that case ever went to trial anywhere was actually here in Georgia. Judge Julie Carnes was a district court judge. CBS put out, talk about responsibility, put out one of the most egregious documentaries you're ever going to watch. It was about who killed John Benet Ramsey. They had some criminal profilers on there, including one who should have known better, and a guy who basically was from the Boulder police and was absolutely convinced that the murderer was John Benet's 9-year-old brother, Burke Ramsey. and just, if you don't know anything about this case, John Bonet, when she was found dead, she was found with a garrote so tight around her throat that if you see the pictures, I mean, it is really brutal. And she had a piece of skull about this big punched out of the back of her head. There's a hole in her skull this big. Either one of those things would have killed her. A 9-year-old didn't do that, okay? I don't think we need a whole lot of scientific analysis or fancy behavioral analysis to know that. But CBS ran with it anyway, accused this person of murder, and of course, he sued. And this ends up going before Judge Carnes, and she writes some really great stuff. It was one that survived the motion to dismiss phase. Eventually, CBS settles because they're going to, unless they want Burke Ramsey, anchoring the news desk because he owns the company, they better work it out. But yeah, it's such a great example and an interesting tie between that famous case. The one place we've ever had any of this really litigated was here in Atlanta, in Georgia.
And I don't want to monopolize all the time. I know we're short on time. I want to see if anybody in the audience would like to ask the podcaster guy himself some questions. Oh my goodness, Mike. It's always Mike.
Where was it?
Mike, be good. I know, you're going to try. I know. That's all you can tell me. You're going to try.
I'm curious about the Kohlberger case because there's a lot of controversy about choosing to cut a deal on that thing, and the families were livid. And so, can we talk about a little about the dark side of prosecutors and overreach, and the fact these people will never know, and things like that?
Well, so there's a few things about that, and we talk about this in our episode, and I would recommend if you want a more detailed discussion of this. But, I mean, one thing to note, and this is how it's often reported, the families opposed it. And you often see this. The family is a monolith. It's not true. Some of the families were very supportive of it. Some of the families didn't want to sit through months-long trials, see pictures of their loved ones brutalized. We're happy. We're perfectly happy with him spending the next 6 years in prison, having no chance of appeal. He's not going anywhere, and not having to worry about some crazy jury that sends him home, or just says we don't want to execute him. I mean, imagine that happens, right? I mean, think about the case in Florida with the school shooter, where they did that whole process for capital punishment, even though he pled guilty. And at the end of the day, they couldn't get a unanimous jury to say he should get the death penalty. So imagine you sit through all those months and months, and then that happens. So yeah, it's a really difficult situation. We talk about this too. Victims have almost no rights in this country. It's just a fact. Part of that's by design. I mean, our system is designed to protect the rights of the accused. We often use that whole part of the justice part, that doing justice should apply to victims as well, so victims need more rights. And I think prosecutors definitely should be consulting with the families. It seems like they fell down, at least with some of the families on that. They didn't give them enough heads up. They didn't sit down with them and talk about it. They didn't lay out all of the reasons that this should happen. And these are the kind of things we talk about in the podcast and urge the many prosecutors who listen to us when they are dealing with situations like this to remember that. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. I mean, I think it was a good thing, but you're right, that is a lesson for prosecutors.
And I'm always mean to Mike, but you did a great job with that question. I am mean to him. Anybody else?
So you were talking about why people do these things. When I clerked for Justice Scalia, one of our early cases was a death penalty case, I think from Alabama, where the defendant had raped and murdered a nun while she prayed in a graveyard. And we were saying, why would anyone do that? And his answer was, you want to be first in line in hell when you get there. There's a long line, and you don't want to have to wait. So that may be the explanation.
That's a good way to get there, too.
But the question I have, having been in the Justice Department, is how in the world did you get approval ethically to do any of this?
So they actually use our podcast in their ethics trainings. I know this because I'm the ethics officer who is not essential, right?
That's how he got ethics approval.
Yeah, so basically, before we were making any money off of it, we just needed the U.S. Attorney's approval. And he was like, I have no idea why you would want to do this, but if you want to do it, go ahead. When the kitty litter people came along and were like, hey, a lot of money in kitty litter, then we had to run it through the whole process, and I was shocked. I was stunned that they approved it. But they were like, hey, as long as you don't talk about any of your cases, it's good. Do it on your own time. It's fine. So yeah, I don't know. I think somebody was like asleep or drunk that day, but we made it. Here we are.
Anyone else? One of my law clerks as well.
Hi, I love true crime, but as I knew more about the law, I became more frustrated with how non-lawyers talk about it. So how do you talk about it in a way that captures the nuances for people who don't understand the law?
Well, it's funny. Obviously, that was one of the reasons we wanted to do it. But in the first few episodes, we would be like, hey, guys, I'm sorry. We're going to be talking about some nerdy stuff. We're going to talk about 404B, and we're going to talk about hearsay. And so we're just warning you, if you want to skip over these next 10 minutes, feel free. And people would email me like, hey, I don't know why you keep apologizing. I've never heard this before in my life. This is the most interesting thing in the world. And it was shocking to us how many people out there, they're just hungry for real information. They're starving for people to explain to them these complex things. Now, it can be tough because you're right. I mean, some of this is really in the weeds, and how you work that out, you have to be thoughtful about it. But we always kind of think about it, when you stand up in front of a jury, if you're going to be a trial lawyer, you're having to explain complex things to people who are just off the street, right? So we sort of view it the same way, and we never treat our audience like they're dumb. We always respect them. We respect where they come from, and explain it as well as we can, to the point that that's why we started Legal Briefs, because people were like, I wish you would just do a whole episode on 404B. I wish you'd do a whole episode. We did 3 episodes on hearsay, right? So you'd be surprised, and this is another reason. So I guess one of my final points. You guys have so much knowledge, information to offer the general public. You really do. You may not even know it, but don't be afraid to step out there and do it about things you're passionate about, because I really think you can educate people and make a real difference.
We have time for one more question. Anybody have something before we turn this Alabama boy over?
I think we tend to hear about it because of the media. I mean, there's some awful stuff, and frankly, I think the fact that the media focuses on terrible things makes terrible people commit terrible crimes because they know they'll be focused on. But I mean, you look at things like serial killers, for instance. The 70s were like serial killer heaven. I mean, there were so many serial killers back then, and you actually do see the numbers decline. So I think in some ways, I mean, the internet, for instance, has enabled so much predation on children. I mean, it's just horrific, the things you see. So I think in that way, it has, but I think in general, there's nothing new under the sun.
Please join me in giving a warm welcome and thank you to Brett Talley.